Okay, so I still get a lot of conversation about I need my leak detector checked out. I think there's something wrong. I'm not sure if it's working right. And the longer the leak detection is taking, the more suspicious the leak detector seems. So it's important for your own sanity and also for finding a leak and not giving out too quick to be able to trust your leak detector completely. Anybody have any idea what they could do to be able to trust their leak detector? We're going to talk about the H10 primarily, and the Infocon that is in the mix too. So I just wanted to go over how to use it and trusting it. Show you testing it. So this is Dre's. I'm going to turn it on. We're not plugged in. Let me give it a little juice. You see we don't have any indicator, but it's making a sound. So it can run while it's charging.
It's so quiet.
And then I just want to say, if you have any suspicion about your battery, you have a low indicator. The low battery indicator comes on when it's really low. But if you're starting to worry about it a little bit, plug it in. Because when the battery starts getting low, it is less consistent. How it pulls in air, and probably how much it heats up the sensor. So don't use it when the battery is low. Plug it in, bring an extension cord if you need to. That's your tip number one for the day. Next we have on here our leak sizes: large, medium, small. When you're going to test with the calibrator, it needs to be on small. And so switch it. And they suggest in the instructions you put it on auto, you set it to small, and then you let it heat up for 2 minutes before the calibration. And that sensor's nice and hot, and then go across and find it. This one's probably already warm. We're going to find out. You can trust this leak detector 100%. It's that simple. And so don't confuse yourself, don't get lost chasing in circles. Test your leak detector. Part of being prepared means that you have what you need if, when it's time to test your leak detector. You don't go in, do your leak detection, and then find out, oh, I don't have the bottle, or the bottle's empty, right? So just keeping your van stock is also paying attention to your tools. A good practice would be every time you use the leak detector, pull the bottle out, just double check if you're close, if you need to stock up on a new bottle. Okay, medium and large. So when it's on small, then you have the potential, if you have a large leak, to pull in a lot more refrigerant and put a lot more wear on your sensor when it's actually on the small than large or medium. And also it can be very hard to pinpoint a large leak. So if you open up your evaporator panel and you're looking around for a leak and it's going off all over the place, move it all the way to large, and then you can get closer to this leak. It might be right there on the line next to the evaporator coil. It could be in the direct return where copper's running down next to the box. Then we either have a leaking box or no box at all, and it's all just floating in that area. You don't want to just pick up a hit in the generator, like you're going to condemn a coil, right? So you can move it to large and then slowly get closer to your leak. That way, change the sensitivity if you're not picking up anything. The other feature that they have on here, which is auto, basically does the same thing that I'm describing between going large, medium, and small. You switch it to auto, and it will, whatever background refrigerant level you have, it'll set that as its baseline. So as soon as you put it into auto mode, this is the baseline, which right now is no refrigerant. But if you have a lot of refrigerant in an area, you switch it to auto, that'll be your new baseline. So if you're coming along and you're in auto mode, let's say we're leaking out of the end of this TXV port. I switch it to auto and I'm getting hits out here. After a little while, I'm going to stop getting hits. In auto, it's constantly readjusting that baseline. So now I'm going to stop getting hits here, even though there's refrigerant. I move a little bit closer, and it's going to be a higher amount of refrigerant hitting the sensor because I'm moving closer to the leak. Now it's going to go off again. But you sit there for a while, and in auto, it's going to adjust one more time, a new baseline. And it lets you get closer and closer to large leaks or when you have multiple leaks on the system. How might that get in the way if you're trying to find a leak? How could that potentially make it harder for you guys?
If it's a small leak and you go close to it and it picks it up and you leave it there too long, it's going to be looking for a larger leak because it's just going to adjust to the level that was already there and zero it out.
Yep, that's right. So if you have it on auto and you get really close to a small leak, now it's going to readjust to that level, right? And then potentially stop going off in that spot until you move it away and you let it recalibrate to where there's no refrigerant in the air, and then you go back to your spot. We've talked about this many times, confirming a leak, going back to the air and coming back and confirming that leak again. Part of that is you could have it in auto mode, and it could potentially have calibrated. You put your straight to where your most likely leak spot is, and it could have got a big hit and then stopped because it recalibrated to that level of refrigerant. So when you have a small leak and you're looking, it's best to put it in manual and adjust this to about 1 beat per second. As the sensor gets warmer, if you do this right away, you might have to readjust throughout the process. But then we don't have that calibration happening in auto. If you go across that leak, it's going to go off every time. It'll sit there just blaring constantly if you're drinking in the refrigerant from that leak. Another common mishap on small leaks, and the reason we go and come back, is if you have a really tiny leak and it's just like a little bit of refrigerant, and sometimes it's a little bubbly. If you put your bubbles on it, you see the bubbles kind of in spurts, not super consistent. This is sucking up air into the sensor, and sometimes you'll have that sitting there and this condensed air of refrigerant fills, and you come here a couple times with your leak detector and you actually suck that all in, and then you go back and you don't really get it exactly. Give it a few seconds for that refrigerant to show up in that really tiny, if it's a really small leak, go right back to that pinpointed spot, and then you should get a hit. Another reason to come away and back to the leak spot. It also lets you know if you just got a random hit on somewhere because you blocked the airflow, stuck it in something weird. Maybe you sucked up some water or some dust enough to block this, and you got a false hit. Your leak detector should have a packet in it that comes with it. If you need more, ask Mario. But filters, replace these often. And just to be safe that you know that this isn't getting clogged and slowing down my leak detection process. Okay, other than the sensor going out because of water or because of use, and you can, using your calibration, you can find out that this actually isn't going off the way it used to. Maybe I need a new sensor. The other thing that can fail is you have a leak somewhere in your hose, so it's not pulling air directly in through here, and that could be all the way back to the connection on the board, or the blower pump, the air pump on the, I don't know why I'm calling it a blower. Maybe it is a blower, but the air pump on the back could have failed. And so to test that, you have your little airflow indicator in here. If you're looking at it really close, you could see a little bit of movement on this. Like right now, I have a little bit of movement. If I switch it to large, I have a little bit more movement. Large leak just pulls in a lot more air. And so we have anyways, to test it, we're going to cover our hole and remove the hand, and you should see the ball bounce up in reaction. And so on low, you can't always tell if it's working for sure, but you can put in a new filter, cover it, And then if you see the ball bounce, you know you got airflow. Make sense? Cool. So now you're able to test your sensor and you're able to test the airflow on this, and you should be able to trust it 100%. If you actually do have a problem with it, bring it into me. We have all the stuff here at the shop to fix it, and we'll fix it pretty quick.
Or if there's no filter and there's no ball, will it work?
Yes. Yep. So without the airflow indicator ball, it'll work. Without the filter, it'll also work. You just have the danger of taking in stuff that clogs the air pump, or more of a danger of sucking in water, maybe even a drip off the side of the coil where the filter might catch that.
But Bert, you said we have replacements for all of that?
Yes, we do. They're very expensive. You should know that it costs a good amount of money to repair or replace a sensor. The whole leak detector right now is almost $700. And so this is an amazing, useful piece of equipment, but it's an important tool for us to guard. Never in all my years have I seen so many leak detectors drinking water like they drink now. They come out of the box thirsty. So you don't have to dip it in water when you're doing the leak detection. You can just slow down and pay attention. Water's on the sides of the coil, waters are in the pan, waters are in the drains. I mean, the amount of people that are looking for a leak in a drain,
This one, the battery doesn't work.
Stick it in the water.
This one, I think.
it hurts.
So Elliot has has especially thirsty leak detectors, is that what I'm hearing? You'll notice that none of your leak detectors that I've seen have the rubber ends on them. Do we have a problem with the rubber ends? Is it like a
We knock them off pretty
Is
quick.
it like a religious opposition to them?
There's no
or-
religious opposition.
Okay. Does this like apply to other parts of your lives? Like if you have like a car, you just like, you don't like the dashboard, you just rip it off and just like throw it in the trash. It's like, yeah. The reason why it has that rubber end is that you see on the one side here, it has that little U-cut, and that prevents you from creating a vacuum that will suck up water. So if you keep this bad boy on, it's gonna be a lot harder to suck up water
When you're touching surfaces.
when you're touching surfaces,
If you
right?
stick it
Now,
in, if you
obviously,
stick it in the
Tell him
pan,
that.
if you stick it in the pan, or if you stick it down in the drain tee, which some guys do, and I've done that a lot, but when you stick it in a drain tee, you just have to make sure you're thinking about where you're putting it. You can't just like blindly stick it in there. You have to, look. The one thing that Bert said that was a filthy lie
that's
was
impossible.
that because you said that it goes between high, medium, and low, and that's what the calibration is doing, and that is not.
You're right. The sensor
is-
is exactly the same the whole
The
time.
sensor's exactly the same the whole time. The sensor's just sitting there living its best life. When you go from medium, low, and high, sorry, small, medium, and large, is what it says now. It used to say the other thing that I just said back in the day.
Sure it did.
Back in the day when I was a kid, when I was a lad. All it's doing is just moving more air. That's literally the only thing that's changing. You're just increasing the output of the pump. And so when you increase the output of the pump, you're moving more air and more refrigerant over the sensor, so it's moving over the sensor more quickly. And so the sensor doesn't have a chance to pick it up as quickly. What you will notice a lot of times with pumps, where the pump isn't moving the right amount of air anymore and you're not getting the flow, you'll put it over a leak and it won't go off right away. And then it will wait like 5-6 seconds and then it will go off. And that's just because it's traveling so slowly through the tube. And so the design behavior, what you should see is that when it's on low, like Bert said, the red ball is barely floating, and then as you increase, you should see it float more and more. But even when you hear a pump that's starting to sound really bad, like as you increase when you go from low, small, medium to large, it starts to sound bad. That's usually an indication that either the pump is failing or it's not mounted properly. And if they're not mounted properly, they don't pump properly. Have you noticed that? Pretty common thing. I've had to fix a lot of these too, so I've been through this. So if you have one where it's starting to sound really rackety, see if you can open it up and just remount the pump. If you get the pump mounted properly, then a lot of times that will take away the problem. Or, use your common sense and look. I mean, are there cracks in the hose? Is there anything damaged? Try to troubleshoot it yourself a little bit. It always kind of, I don't want to say freaks me out, but it always kind of freaks me out a little bit when we have a tool like this. This is a very simple machine. This is not like, super complicated. You have a sensor which is essentially just a little, well, I mean, it has a heater in it, and so, and that, and as that air and gas passes over that heater, it breaks it down into its kind of base molecules, and then that's what it's detecting, right? So when a sensor fails, and they all do in these, it's going to be less and less sensitive than it once was. And so you, of all people, should know if, because every time you're using it, you're going across this reference point, like, hey, this time it's not really acting the same way it used to. It's not being as sensitive. That's a sign that you need to replace that sensor. Or the intermediate step, which is to increase the heater adjustment. So you'll all notice here, we have this heater adjustment right here, this plus and minus heater adjustment. Have you seen that? So if you crank that sucker up, it'll start working better again. But what are you doing? You're making the sensor hotter. And when you make the sensor hotter, you also reduce its life. So every time you put a new sensor in, you need to dial that sucker back, and then just so it's just working, and then as you go, you dial up the heat on that sensor as it starts to get less and less sensitive. That's why it has that adjustment. But you have to remember to go back to the beginning every time when you start over. Does that make sense? You all are doing that, right?
Of course not.
Of course not. But that's what I'm saying. Like, all that information, everything that I just said, is available in the manual. It's all there. Like, it's not, you don't have to be a genius, you don't have to be, and so when you start to think about a $700 tool, that if it's not working properly, it really affects your ability to do your job, right? How many times is it like, oh man, I don't know, I guess, you know, I was picking up a little on the EVAP, so I guess I'll tell Buddy, or, you know, I need you to look at my leak detector, I need somebody else to come out here. That really affects our job. Go back to what we've been talking about, what I've been talking about in these classes. Taking it seriously, like, hey, this is my profession, I'm doing this for myself and my family, I'm doing this because I want to grow, I want to make more money, I want to progress, all those things. Think of it that way, and knowing how to fix your own leak detector, knowing what's going on with it. Think of it just like the piece of equipment you're working on, right? It's not acceptable for you to not know how it works and not know how to fix it. Same thing with your leak detector. Just know how it works, know how to fix it. It's not, you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be, you got a manual, you got a machine here, take it apart, figure out how to fix that machine. And sometimes you'll make a mistake. Sometimes you'll suck water in it. Sometimes you'll misdiagnose the pump when it was the sensor when it was the pump, or you think the hose is leaking and it wasn't, or whatever. But use that as an opportunity to learn now. Next time, oh, okay, so that's what it was. No biggie, right? It's okay to have a culture of no biggie when it was an honest mistake that you pursued, right? You pursued the answer and you came up with the wrong answer, and now you've learned something new. That's no biggie. What is a biggie is, no, I don't know. Check out emotionally, check out mentally. It's not my problem, somebody else's job, right? That's that idea of, like, we are professionals in this room. You know, we are all men, we are all adults. We take our profession seriously, and nobody else is coming to save us. This idea that there's somebody else out there who's going to figure this out for us, because that's not a mindset of a technician. That's the mindset of a fast food worker, right? And there's nothing wrong with being a fast food worker, but none of us here are that. We're professionals, we're independent, and we need to know how our tools work. And that's true of this, that's true when we give you these more advanced tools and all this, you just need to know how they work. This isn't a lecture. I'm not telling you that you're not doing that, but knowing how your tools work and knowing how to apply them and use them appropriately is going to save you a lot of heartache, it's going to save the company a lot of money, and it's going to make you move up the ranks and be seen more and more as more and more valuable anywhere you work, let alone at Kalos. So, just to anchor this home. Large, small, medium, make sure you have flow. If you don't have a flow ball in your leak detector, get a flow ball in your leak detector. If you don't have a filter in your leak detector, get a filter in your leak detector. If you don't have the rubber end, get a rubber end, get it on there, right? Again, because the idea is, well, I'm just good, I'll just keep it out of the water. Well, no, we're not. You're not going to. Eventually, you're going to get it in the water. And like, this doesn't prevent this from being a good leak detector. It doesn't change anything, right? It just prevents you from getting right on the metal, because even if you have a little piece of condensate, if you get that seal around it, it's going to suck it right up in. Again, if you ever do get to a position where you just sucked a little bit of water in it, what do? Stop. Immediately shut it off, take it apart, see if you can prevent it from actually getting in this pickup tube. Because still, a lot of things have to happen. Can't get this one open, it's too weak. it has to actually make it into that little tube right there for it to actually damage and pull all the way back to the sensor. So just because you got a little bit in here doesn't mean that you're ruined, right? It actually has to make it in here. And so what do? Oh, I just picked some up. All right, quick, get it off. Hold this, pull this end off. See if we actually got it in there or not. Make sense? And you'll know pretty quickly, because once you pull that apart, if this is still open, the pump's still going to sound normal. You can then actually just take this bit and just go against here and just see, like, am I still okay, right? Is it still working? Get all the water cleared out of here. What do you do if you get water in some sort of electronics or something and you need to get that water out? Your phone, your meter, whatever. What do you do?
Turn it off, like dry it up.
It's a good way. Don't use it, right? Take the batteries out immediately. But we have a secret weapon, which is a vacuum chamber. We have one at least, but probably a couple. If you take and put electronics in a vacuum chamber and pull a vacuum on it, what happens to the moisture?
It evaporates.
It evaporates, it boils. That's what we do inside of the system. So we have this magic tool fixing, electronic fixing device available to us. It's on all of your trucks, called a vacuum pump, and all you need is the vacuum chamber. And we can get more of them if you guys get used to using them, right? But if you get a meter, it gets wet, and it's like, it's not working right. Get the batteries out of it, let it dry, but if you can get back here, or you have a few minutes when you're here for a meeting, just throw it in the vacuum chamber, pull a vacuum on it.
Why are we taking the batteries out?
Because, again, you have a source of current, so there's a potential for shorts and all that, but then also batteries can explode under vacuum as well. So,
So don't put your phone in the vacuum chamber.
don't put your phone in the vacuum chamber unless you take the battery out of it.
It's 12.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Yeah. You get it with the battery in?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And some phones are really hard to get the batteries out of, obviously, so that
there you go.
may be a problem.
We are using more of these. The price is now consistent with the H10, and we've so far had pretty good success. Who in here has been using Adriel, Austin, Alex, Alfonso, Justin? When I gave them to you, I hadn't used them in the field. I still haven't used these much in the field, except for when I'm riding along with you guys. The instructions were read the manual, watch the instruction videos they have. They have so many great videos on this. But they have two modes, and the one that is really fantastic, you actually turn it on, and then you push select to set the baseline for your sensor. And so instead of leaving it on the automatically readjusting the baseline mode, like the auto on the H10, you can set it yourself. So take it out into clean air, push the, it's actually a sense 0 button, and it sets the baseline. Then you bring it in to look for your leak. And then if you have a really large leak and it's going off everywhere, you can set that baseline. So it's only going to go off when I get closer to the leak. And just keep doing that as you get down closer and closer to the leak. So they have a video with the different chambers getting closer and closer to a leak online and showing you how to use that as you get closer, pull it back out into the air, reset that baseline. It's super handy. And these also have replaceable sensors, because all sensors eventually burn out as well. And you can use, also use like a CO2 sensor and stuff like that for future refrigerants or future stages in your career. So, fantastic. It's also a very reliable tool.
Yeah, so that isn't the Stratus, that's the next.
Yeah, it's the next one down.
Okay. One thing about that leak detector is there's two core leak detection technologies. There's infrared and there's heated diode. Okay, so this is a heated diode, and some of them will call them a heated pentode, or it's the same basic idea, right? You're heating it up and you're running the gas over and it's breaking it down, and that's how it senses. Whereas with an infrared, it doesn't have a base reference, so it always is referencing to where you started out with. And so if you take this and you start it up in an already contaminated area, then that's going to mess with the baseline. And so you want to start it up outside. Same thing with any leak detector. You want to start with a clean sample and then you go in. But the other thing is this is constantly going to be resetting its baseline as well. Infrared is that way. So infrared, you're supposed to be sweeping. You don't just set it on a leak, because if you do, it'll go off and it'll eventually stop going off. And so you just have to, know that. And again, I like that field piece. Field piece makes both. They make an infrared and they make a heated diode, and I'm not sure which one that is.
Heated diode.
Yeah, that's
Heated diode, okay.
Yeah.
So if it's heated diode, again, heated diode sensors don't last as long. They tend to be a little bit more accurate. They used to, nowadays not as much, but they're easier to use because they're more like the H10. They're more like what we're used to. You can just keep going back to that same spot and it'll keep going off on you. Whereas with an infrared, you always have to kind of be moving it, slowly, but you have to be moving it. That makes sense? So knowing which type you have is pretty important.
Yeah, that's good. And that's why also being able to readjust the baseline for it as you're going along, taking it up to a cleaner spot, readjusting the baseline, moving away from the leak, readjusting the baseline helps. That's it, the leak detection. There's a leak detection is really fun. Once you get a little confidence,
Yeah, it is.
it's you diagnosing and chasing it down. And if you think about it, we have a system, half of it's here, half of it's outside, and then we have copper lines going through a chase somewhere. It's not that complicated. If there's a leak on there and we have a working tool, we can find this leak. It's really not. And I think we all experience the frustration of looking for a leak that's hard to get to. And we're not really sure if our leak detector is working. If we eliminate that side of it, I think it'll help a lot with the confidence. Okay, I can just keep walking through this process and find all the leaks, not just my first leak.
Use your visual cues, or your tactile cues. Is there water in the pan? Is there oil spotting on the condenser coil? How rusted is my line dryer? Things like that.
Yeah.
So, one thing with leak detection, when it comes to dealing with customers, I was at the house yesterday actually, quoting on a new system, and, I asked them, hey, like, what's wrong with the system? Do you guys know? Have you had it checked? And like, a lot of the time when another company does a leak detection, the customer, he's like, well, they said it had a leaking coil. We're not really sure. Like they don't have faith in the diagnostic. When somebody pulls out a little electronic beepy thing, that's just what they typically call it, right? It's this beepy thing so the point of that is like if you can pinpoint a leak and find it in the coil, I always would be like, hey, come over, look at this real quick. Let me like explain this process with you of how you're finding that leak, because then that gives them confidence in your diagnosis. But a lot of people are just like, they said it's in the coil, but we should probably replace the copper lines too, right? Because they're just not confident in the diagnosis. Because all they hear is, and again, maybe a lot of technicians just pull out, one of those and it's just screaming the whole time, and they're like, oh, it's leaking, right? And they don't show them the details of it. So that's a really good way to build trust with a customer, of taking 5 minutes with them or a few minutes with them and walking them through where you find it.
Yep, that's really good. And for yourself, you should not be satisfied with the leak unless you prove it to yourself in that same way.
Yeah.
This is the exact spot. It's not here, it's here. It's not here, it's here. And so always finish your leak detections down to that point. And that helps improve your skill as you go. Like when you are working for accuracy, you get more and more skilled and faster and faster. And then it helps with your confidence in showing that to a customer and being able to prove it.
Yeah.
It's really good, Tyler, thanks. Yeah.
When we're doing a leak detection, if I find a leak in the coil, I don't do it often, but I might proceed to check if the line set is in the attic or whatever. I might go on through there as well to confirm that there's not a possible leak, and then like I will do it if I check like a quick sweep in the condenser. But most times if it's not drastically flat, it might not be inside of there. I might still proceed into checking the complete system, everything that's exposed, even if I find a leak as well.
So, yeah, always go over anything exposed, anything that you have access to. Now, I don't think you need to be crawling through the attic, taking line height off, unless you have a very low system. And this is where, like, using your judgment and understanding the whole situation, reading history. If we've been out here a couple times, adding a refrigerant, and you find a little tiny hit on the evaporator coil, you're not satisfied that this is our only issue. You're going to be looking through everything else, right? And if you should pull up to a system and it's almost flat, or maybe it's 4 pounds or more low, and you just get a little hit on the evaporator, we're looking for the faster leak. Maybe this evaporator's been leaking for 2 years, or it has a really small leak, but the reason they called you out is because something else blew out really fast, and their AC stopped working quickly. So using your judgment, using the history, conversation with the customer, when did this start to happen? Have other people been adding refrigerant? Will let you know if you're looking for a fast leak or a slow leak. But always look over everything that you have easy access to and all your common points.
Yeah, I would add to that. The place you want to get to is that you are confident. So if you are not confident, then you need to work until you are, and that's trusting your intuition to some degree. But intuition is built over experience. What you don't want to do is any impulse. This is what we've been talking about. Any impulse to pass this on to somebody else. You know, oh, well, I'll just have a senior tech look at it when he comes to do the coil. You know, whatever, right? Like whatever that is, just reject that impulse. And so if you don't feel, you're like, I picked it up in the evap, but man, that wasn't a very convincing leak, right? So do you think that it's ever possible that systems have more than one leak? Mm-hmm. Of course, right, obviously. But if you go to that system and you're talking, it's a couple ounces low, it's not even a pound, and you're picking up what seems like a couple ounces low type of a leak in the evaporator, okay, makes sense, right? But if you are really flat and you're really having to try hard to find it, I'm going to use an example of like back in the day, we were taught when I was at Del Air to run systems in heat mode. Unhook the blower, run it in heat mode. Get that sucker really up there, right?
Pressure.
Well, of course you'd find a lot of leaks doing it that way, right? And that, because a lot of those coils are leaking, and the old line is, if it doesn't have a leak, then make one. And again, I'm not like physically make one, but just get the pressure up so high that one's going to probably pop, right? And that's horrible. Like that's not what we're doing here. If it's significantly low, you probably have a leak somewhere else, but where do you look? Well, you start with all the obvious things. If it's a ductless system, for example, let's look at the flares, right? I mean, if it's an older unitary system and it has a line dryer, look at the line dryer. Look at the bottom side of the accumulator. All those sorts of obvious leak places that you typically find a leak in. Do we sometimes get leaks in the middle of line sets? Sure. Nowadays, with you get kind of like bad copper now. It can happen, but look for signs of that, greening and pitting, and maybe there's a water softener that's discharging nearby the chase. Those are all things that can be kind of an indication. One of the ones that Jesse and I did years ago was it was actually when we were first testing the predecessor to the Inflicon there. We went to a job and it had a persistent leak, and we found one in the evaporator coil, but then we saw like a big white spot on the ground underneath the drain line, right over top of the copper. So the copper went in the ground, and there was this big, kind of like white spot. And what causes that? Bleach, right? Customer pouring a lot of bleach down the drain. It wasn't just a little; it was like clearly stained the mulch. And they were—I don't know what they were trying to solve for. It's like, we better dig that up. And sure enough, we dug it up, and it was a significant hissing leak in the drain. In the chase. So it's that sort of spidey sense thing that you have to have your eyes open. You have to have your head up. You have to be paying attention to all these different factors, and you'll find a lot of problems. And when you walk away from a job that you're confident that you found the leaks, you are very rarely going to be wrong, right? And if you are, that's okay, because it happens to the best of us, right? You sometimes you miss it, right? But that's what you want to get to, is that level of certainty, rather than like, man, I don't know, I don't feel good about that. And you know when you feel that way, right? We all know when we feel that way. And sometimes we feel that way just because we're new, and that's okay, right? You're new, you're going to feel that way. But you have to then push a little bit harder. You have to take a little bit more time until you get to, okay, at this point, I feel pretty good about what I've done, and now I'm gonna ship it and see what we find. Now, on the flip side of this, though, for any of you who are putting coils in or replacing anything that was supposed to be leaking, what is the very first thing you do when you show up?
Re-diagnose.
You reconfirm that. 100% of the time you reconfirm. 100% of the time. And when you're reconfirming, you're turning your spidey senses on again too. You're not just reconfirming. You're paying, in fact, the goal should never be to try to, like, you know, prove somebody else wrong. But have a little fun with it.
Thanks for watching. If you're willing, give this video a thumbs up and drop us a comment. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay updated with all of our future videos. And as a quick reminder, HVAC School isn't just a YouTube channel. Dive deeper with us at our main website, hvacrschool.com. Curious for more knowledge on the go? We've got you covered. Tune into the HVAC School podcast, available on all your favorite podcast apps. And while you're at it, join our thriving Facebook group. Also, don't miss out on our free mobile applications available for both iPhone and Android. We're all about community. For techs, by techs.